today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Wendy Dillard here. Today is Thursday, February the 1st, 2018, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Your second daily dose of happy for the day. And I hope your day's been going happily along, Wendy, because I have to say this has been a very productive day for me. I'm moving along. I'm checking things off on the list. Check. So I must be in the vortex in terms of the check.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yes, my day has been going very well as also, so it's all good.
That's a good thing. Something that I didn't mention yesterday, but I wanted to mention it today in the win column. We actually exceeded, a couple days ago, 19,000 plays, and we are within shouting distance of 20,000 plays, which is just boggling my mind. Now, here's something that'll boggle your mind even more, because since today is February 1st, I also calculated what the numbers were for November. And of those 20,000 plays, one-third of them happened, or not November, I said November, January. Today's February. November, December, January, February. So January comes before February. November's like 3 months back.
Well, at least this year, January
right.
comes before February. We'll come up with a new idea next year.
We're going to attract a new one, is that it? A new order to the months. Okay. No, January had one-third of the entire 20,000 plays.
Well, as I haven't said this word in a couple weeks, that is momentum.
It definitely is momentum. I mean, you know that little curve that I draw with my spreadsheet to see how the thing is going, and it's been going straight up? Guess which direction it's going? It's still going straight up. It's just like
flying.
Wow.
That's exciting.
It looks like a perfect hyperbola. I mean, it's just an absolute. It's like a shepherd's hook. It started down here,
Well, I'll tell you, I'm on somebody's email list, and she was punctuating how she has had like 109,000 listens and like 20,000 downloads or something in the last, I don't know if it's been a year and a half, however long it's been since she started her podcast, which is huge.
It
and,
is.
And she's been
gigantic.
number one on several occasions, and I went, now there's something I want to compete with.
Yeah.
Not because I'm trying to compete or beat her, but I saw those numbers and I went, oh yeah, that's so within reach for us. I mean, big time.
Easily.
Because I think about who she is, I think about what she's putting out there, and I'm like, what we're putting out there is big. It's definitely in line with what she's doing. So, oh yeah, we can crank that puppy up. It's
no
gonna
doubt.
move.
No doubt. And we will, too. I mean, literally the only thing that, from a non-LOA perspective, slows us down is that just people haven't heard of us yet. But they will. It's happening. It's coming. It's just a matter of time. That's all. We'll see how long that's going to be.
Law of attraction is the matching mechanism.
It is.
So it can't not touch more people. And our word can't, I mean, it's like it has to happen because it is law of attraction. You know, those who are interested in this topic, they'll be attracted. If they're ready, we're here. And they'll find their way to us. And we'll find our way to them.
It's such a pure thing. I mean, law of attraction is the topic. Law of attraction is also putting the topic into the players, the iPhones and the Androids and so forth, of all these people who don't know about us yet. I mean, there is nothing more pure that I can think of than that. That's just a pure LOA play, no matter how you look at it. It's great.
I like to say it's all good.
It's all good. That's right. So anyway, another thing that is all good is the topic for today, because this topic is one that kind of, we're kind of dancing around there for a second there. We all have this tendency. We want to make sure that we stay in that positive place, right? And that we're giving ourselves the positive energetic push and the high emotions and, using the right words and all that kind of stuff. But we can also kind of trip ourselves up because, like you and I were talking about before the podcast, it can seem like, well, geez, if I use the wrong words, then everything's going to blow up on me or everything's going to fall apart. And we actually get more wrapped up about that than anything else.
Before we put the cart before the horse, let's say what the actual topic is.
Okay. You first.
Okay. So it's, do words really matter?
Do they really matter?
Are the words we're using, do they really matter? Okay. Now continue.
Okay. Sorry. Speaking of dancing around, I was doing a little dancing around the topic myself. So I raised my hand. I'm guilty. No problem. But do words matter? Yeah. I mean, I think words matter a lot, but they aren't necessarily something we want to treat as, something being endowed with magical powers. They matter because we human beings use them. They're our way of communicating. So they matter because of us. We're the ones who actually give them the matter, literally, when you think about it. Because every thought that we put out there turns into some form of matter eventually, or it turns into another thought at least on its way to matter.
Well, I think one of the sentences or things that I said yesterday was that what we say doesn't matter, but how we feel about what we say is what is broadcast vibrationally. Mm-hmm. So our feelings is what really matters. However, you're right, there is magic within words because we associate words with certain meaning.
Yes.
And when we do that, we feel certain things when we say certain things using certain words. So in a way, kind of like not directly, but words do matter to some degree. And, there's caveats to everything, so I just thought it'd be fun to kind of dive into it and talk about it.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, one of the first examples that comes to my mind is something that Abraham talks about. There's one section in one of the books, I can't remember which one, where they differentiate between wanting and needing something. And their differentiation is if you need something, then you're feeling lack of it, and you're on the lack end of the stick, so to speak, and you're not in a happy place about it. Whereas if you want it, you're in a positive place. But to just show just how funky individual associations can be, for me, wanting is the lacking end, desire is the positive end. And both are actually accurate.
Well, and it's fun that you brought up the word desire because that's one of my favorite words. Mm-hmm. But I was talking to someone a long time ago, and we were playing with the words want and desire, and according to that person's understandings, they were saying desire was the one that was not preferred.
Yeah, there you go.
Want was preferred. And then I was working with someone else, and they said, oh, no, wanting is saying wanting from the Abraham perspective is so much better from desire because desire has a sense of, like, yearning and, like, desperation. And truly, every person you talk to is going to have a different slant.
It gets to the point where you desire to want to have a better need. Because...
Well, and that's where I'm really grateful that I'm not hung up on the words, but I am becoming more aware of how each word feels to me and the meaning that I've given them. That's what has more weight or more importance.
Yes, I agree totally. That's really the big thing there. And it's also important to remember language is, or more precisely, the English language and the languages of Earth, let's put them that way. These languages are limited. They're limited by human physical experience. Whereas from what we've been told, particularly by Abraham, about what language is in the non-physical, language there is all vibrational. And literally they can communicate anything perfectly using their vibrational language, so to speak. So if human language is, by comparison, not quite as accurate, then of course there's going to be confusion sometimes about what the words mean and where are they going to be used and how is it going to affect you, because it's not as precise as vibration is. Vibration, that's about as pure as you're going to get, I think.
Oh, totally. I totally agree. Something that I remember learning when I was working with Tony Robbins, not personally, but when I was going through all his seminars and his course materials, I remember him talking about something that he calls transformational vocabulary, because he talks about how the words that we use, first of all, we only use words that we know or have experience with. And if you don't have certain words in your vocabulary, he says you can't experience what that word means maybe to someone else who does use that word. And I thought that was kind of interesting, and I think I've mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again, that I had noticed years ago that I used the word mistake a lot. And when I said, oh, I made a mistake, it felt really bad to me, really heavy, and it made me feel bad about myself. And I didn't like the fact that I was feeling that way every time I made a miscalculation or an error or misunderstood something. I was so perfectionistic that I just really beat myself up pretty bad.
Mm.
And so I thought, well, if Tony Robbins says if you don't have a word in your vocabulary, you cannot experience it, I wonder if that's true. And so I just kind of did an experiment, and I went, I'm going to remove the word mistake from my vocabulary and just not use it and just see what happens.
And what happened?
And so, of course, there were times that I did this thing that was the M word that I no longer was using, but it forced me to find different ways to express or articulate it. And so I noticed that by using different words, sometimes the words I used made me laugh. You know, sometimes it just kind of like, oh, it didn't have a negative effect. But then I'm going to bring in Tony's thing about transformational vocabulary. This is where you purposefully take certain what I'll call hot words that like really press your buttons in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And he suggests that you take that word, and in the time that you have the experience where normally you would use that word, find a word that has a little bit less charge on it or a little less negativity, and just see where that takes you. And so that's kind of what I did by removing the mistake word from my vocabulary. And so I would make an error, and I would say something like, well, I've made an error. And I would do it kind of with this sophistication. I've made an error. And it would make me laugh. And even though, yes, I had just made a mistake, somehow now the experience wasn't as dire inside of me. It didn't rip me apart. And so I literally removed the word mistake for 10 years.
Wow.
I did not use that word about myself at all. And I will tell you, in that time period, I mean, that's a long time period, and it wasn't like I set myself up to just remove it for 10 years. I just happened to have noticed 10 years is when I went, hey, you know what, it's been 10 years. I haven't used the word mistake. And I tried using it just to hear how it sounded. I went, that doesn't even feel good. Ooh, I don't want to use that word. And so I have found so many different ways to articulate things. Like, okay, I do so many tasks in a day that I don't expect perfection out of me anymore. And so if I have a coworker shoot me an email and say, hey, such and such is not visible to me, and I go and I look and I go, oop, it's because I forgot to flip the switch so they could have it visible to them, I would just say, not a problem. I've taken care of that. All's well. Now, I didn't bother to tell them it was my fault.
Good thing.
I didn't bother to tell them what the actual mechanics were behind the scenes that they don't even know about. All I told them was that I fixed it. Let me be a hero in their eyes.
Sure.
They don't have to know I was actually the one who screwed up. And I'm purposely using the word screwed up just to make an exaggerated point, because I don't say those kinds of things about myself. And so before I send out an email, even when I'm the one who did make some kind of a, faux pas, I'm like, yeah, nobody needs to know that. And I would say it in a way that's just kind of, they got what they needed, but they didn't have to know where the problem actually originated. And I really think that came, how I do that today came from my 10-year experiment removing the word mistake, because I don't like it when I take something on, as like, ooh, I'm bad. Now, I have but at the same time, Walt, I have no problem saying, yep, I'm the one who overlooked that, yep. But I don't have any negative charge on it anymore.
I think that's really the point, because you realized you did have a negative charge, and there's no reason to get hung up on a word, so you just changed words. That was real simple. It was a nice, simple, replacement strategy, and I love it. I think it's great.
It worked.
Now, another thing that often happens with these kinds of word situations is that, well, I'm trying to think how to say it. Very, very often, where there's one word that somebody might consider negative, another person might have a completely different take on it. And we kind of alluded to that when we talked about desire and wanting and needing and all that kind of thing. So, for instance, you were talking about mistakes. I'm not sure if I actually thought about it in terms of that word specifically. I think I probably thought about errors, but I probably used the word mistakes too. I remember writing an essay when I was 19, 20 years old. And I wrote it mainly for my own benefit. I think I actually wrote it for some little mag or something like that, some little newsletter thingy. And the article was essentially about the value of making mistakes. My point in the article was, if we didn't make mistakes, we wouldn't grow, which is a point that, of course, a lot of people have made. But my reason for bringing this up is I bragged in that article that I made 20, 30, 40 mistakes a day, sometimes that many in an hour. And when I was making that many in an hour, I knew I was growing. So for me, words like mistakes and errors, I was deliberately programming myself to say, this is a powerful thing I'm doing here. This isn't a bad thing at all. This is great. This is wonderful, And it got to the point where I didn't really care about mistakes anymore. I mean, I do. I'll get frustrated like anybody else. But mistakes, it was a way of overcoming the perfectionist side of myself, because everybody has that perfectionist side, right? Where we have the side where, everything's got to be just right, just perfect. And I knew that wasn't serving me.
But you were designing a new meaning for what mistakes actually were.
Yeah.
And you were no longer judging it as a bad thing.
Exactly, yeah.
You had actually put such a positive spin on it that you called it growing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty phenomenal.
I think so too. I'm very proud of myself for having done that.
Well, I was reading a book a while back, and it said that failure is not an option when you never use the word failure.
Okay. I'm not sure I understand
that. That's kind of like my mistake thing. I don't make mistakes if I don't ever say mistakes. Because when I didn't do something that was inaccurate, I just called it by a different name, but it had the meaning of it was kind of like you. I'm growing. It was like, oh, look, I don't have to beat up on myself over this. It feels good when I make this is really the truth. When I make a mistake today, it actually feels good to me that, one, I can admit it, and two, I get over it with like no big deal, because I don't judge myself for it.
Right.
So sometimes I actually kind of enjoy having the awareness that I made a mistake.
That's good, yeah.
Just so I could go, look how far I've come.
And if I ever get somebody who tries to treat a mistake as something that they're going to, hang me in effigy about, they'll how people do it. They'll either do it somewhat kindly or somewhat unkindly. If they do it the more kindly way, they'll say, oh, well, you made a mistake there, that kind of thing. And my response is going to be something along the lines of, yeah, so? So what's your point?
But, I think the more social norm is that people like to point out people's mistake in order to judge them, because oftentimes if they judge someone else, it makes themselves feel a little bit better. And so it's like when there's no judgeable offense, it kind of takes the sting away from somebody's attempt at trying to judge you.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, I think actually that's why I come back with that comeback I told you about, that, so what's your point? Because what I'm really saying to them is, okay, you want to judge me on this? Let's see if you can do it directly. And basically I just threw the gauntlet back at them, right? Saying, okay, go on. You want to judge me? Let's do it. Come on. Give me your best shot. Because I know this is the part I learned really early on in life. And I had to relearn it a few times afterward, I have to tell you. I know that if you actually state what's this worst case scenario, if you actually lay it out there, let's just do this worst case scenario. What is it? You find out that the worst case scenario ain't all that bad. And that happens to be true time after time after time. The thing that we fear the most isn't all that bad when you actually just lay it out there. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the best. That's one of my favorite ways to take the sting out of something. You just lay it out there. Okay, all right. You want to make a big deal out of this? Okay, make a big deal. Go ahead. Go on. What are you waiting for? Go on.
A couple years ago, I was introduced to a body of work through some friends of mine, and they used the word judgment quite often. Mm-hmm. Now, they didn't use it in a negative way. They used it to kind of highlight what judgment is and how, kind of as a society, we judge so often that much of the time we're not even aware that we're judging. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that this word was kind of up in my face, I was really paying attention in a new way. And one of the things that I came to recognize is how, when you're not feeling good about something, it's usually because you're judging it, somebody else, or yourself.
True.
Judgment in itself is resistance to something.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that I've, like I said, with these friends, I've kind of picked up some new languaging is that they would say, oh, there's no judgment in this. It's just data. And, of course, that was like...
That's like a signal.
Yeah, I mean, that just took me a while, but now that has been infiltrated into my vocabulary because I now understand it from a new position. So if, let's say, I'm talking about something, even if it has a negative connotation to it, if I say, oh, I'm not judging it, I'm just sharing, it's just information, it's just data, it's just neutral in me as far as what I'm sharing. It's kind of like if I said, I was driving down the road and I saw a dead dog. Now, some people might get really sad because, oh, there was a dog and oh, how sad. And someone else might just, somebody who's cruel, who goes out and, hunts for sport, might get all excited. But to me, because I don't think of death as death, that all life has a continuation, when I think about a dog that had, like something that Abraham said over and over again, is that like a dog who's in the back seat of a car with his head out, even though it may catch a few flies or whatever, it's so happy just to have the wind in their face that if the next thing they did, they jumped out of a pickup truck and got hit by a car, that would not be a sadness to a dog. It's like it was worth the thrill of being in the back of the pickup and just enjoying the wind on his face. And then he's like, next.
Yeah, right.
And so I really have come to understand, I know this is kind of a different topic, but I've really come to feel that way about if I were to see a dog that was killed on the side of the road. I'm like, oh, hopefully that dog had the wind of its face and had an adventure before it went, done, next. So if somebody were to say, oh, I saw this dead dog on the side of the road and they got all sad, I would think about it in terms of it's just information. I don't judge whether that was a bad thing that happened, a sad thing that happened, or a horrible thing that happened. And I also don't look at it like, oh, yippee, it's a happy thing. It's just kind of neutral in my experience. It just is.
I tend to agree with you. I think the only thing I might add is there are times when I feel just a bit of sadness just because, their life stopped, not stopped, but their physical life came to an end. They're having such a great time. It would have been great if they could have kept continuing. It's not like, oh my God, they're dead. That's not the idea. It's just, that's the end. I can't wait for them to get on to the next one. I wonder what the next one's going to be. But it doesn't have any more weight than that. It's because you're right. It's not like everything just stops. We continue. They continue. All beings continue past death. Death is just like a little milestone more than anything else. And what happens after that is just as cool or even more cool than what was there before.
And I know for me, my goal in my life is any area where I naturally feel bad, upset, angry, revengeful, blameful, whatever, wherever there's a negative emotion going on in my life in response to something, my goal is to bring it to a space of neutral where I can talk about it and it no longer has a negative charge.
Right, because that's really the key right there. We don't want the negative charge.
Right, like for instance, I tell many stories both in my life and on this show, and if to know me is to know that if I'm telling a story about something that was really unpleasant once upon a time, that, trust me, when I'm sharing it, I'm not getting into the negative emotion of it. I'm able to share it from a place of this is just pure information, and I'm sharing it with you because you're not going to understand the end of my story if I don't tell you the beginning of my story and why the end means so much to me. But at the same time, I also don't want people to go into the, oh, God, you poor thing, because it's like, I'm not even feeling that. Why should anybody else?
Right, yeah.
And
well,
so for me, I can say it's just data.
Yep.
And those are words that I use. I mean, because the show is about do words really matter. When I learned the phrase, it's just data, that really helped me anchor myself in the fact that it is just information, and I have no particular negative feeling about it. Therefore, there's nothing negative going out into, the atmosphere. There's no vibrational broadcast that's going to bring this horrible thing back into my life, because I'm sharing it just from a place of it's just data. It just is. I don't feel bad about it. It's okay, But of course, purposefully, when I'm going to tell a story, I want to end on an up note, because that's the broadcast that I want to repeat.
Sure.
So that I keep getting more of the positive something that I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
And the thought that goes along with that for me is, right now we are sharing our message here about the difference between having a negative charge attached to something and turning it into a positive charge, and how it's always a good idea to do that. If that's resonating with listeners, we just want to take 15 seconds to remind you, share with a friend, and at the same time subscribe and share. If you've not already subscribed, go through the steps. I mean, we go through it every show, all the details about how to do it. But subscribe and make sure that you're following the podcast every single time, because this is the kind of good stuff we talk about every single day, twice a day. And then share it with a friend. Let a friend know, because other people want to know about it too. So take advantage of the fact that you are learning how to remove that negative charge and do something more for yourself. Give yourself the ongoing gift.
Exactly. And, hopefully you'll take something away from what we're saying in a way that it can help to improve the quality of your life. Walt and I are very different people. We have a lot in common, but we also come from very different backgrounds and very different ways of thinking.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's kind of what makes it fun conversation for the two of us.
Very much.
It's because we don't always know what the other one's going to think on any given subject. We throw it out there and it's like, well, didn't know that.
Or where is it going next?
But it makes for fun conversation. But, to me, the overall picture in how I look at it is so many different listeners come from so many different perspectives. My hope is that either you or I will say something that tickles their ear, and they go, oh, I can relate totally to what he's saying. I don't know about her. She's a little wacky. But, and then someone else is going, I love what she's saying. No, I'm not on board with how his perspective. I don't really care. I just would like to know that we're imparting some kind of goodwill, some kind of inspiration, something that will encourage you to take some new information into your day, so that, you can live a happy, wonderful, successful, satisfied life. Absolutely.
Yeah, very much, very, very totally much. I just can't phrase this right now. I am very much in agreement with what you're saying. I just can't spell it out right now.
You mean words? The
words. It's the words.
You?
The words are in the way.
Don't matter. If you just go, people will get it.
There it is. Okay, we're done with the show. It's it right there. Oh, good grief. Now, there is another side to words that we should touch on.
Okay.
And that side is, I see this a lot, particularly on Facebook. People wanting to use not just words, but also to use the law of attraction to attract stuff that really isn't in their power to attract. And I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
For instance, there's one person on Facebook I can think of who we actually no longer are in connection with each other. She ended up blocking me because I kept telling her, well, that's not going to work. She wants to use the law of attraction to bend the will of another person.
Good luck.
Like I said, I don't think that's going to work real well for you. And there is actually, there are quite a few people who have bought into the idea that because there are certain teachers out there who teach you, well, if you want to attract someone into your life who doesn't care about you, or you want to bring an ex back or whatever, here's the ways you do it. And they give some advice. It's pretty good advice, but it fails to take one particular key point into account, which is the other person has free will too. I mean, there's got to be alignment of the vibration here. Otherwise, it ain't going to work.
Well, that's true. But here's what's fascinating about relationships in particular is that you can have two people that are connected, even if one person, in your words, is manipulating the other person to come into their life. If there wasn't some matching quality between the two of them, the manipulation couldn't have worked.
That's right. Yeah.
And like I can say for my ex-husband and I, when we first, connected, we had a lot of matching qualities. We also had a lot of unmatching qualities, but at the time we didn't look at those. And I will tell you that what eventually ended our marriage is the fact that the things that matched when we first were married were things that changed over time.
Oh.
Like I know I've shared this about myself, that I was the ultimate enabler. I watched my mother's marriage with my father, and she took care of his every need, and he loved to be taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some areas that he took care of her needs where she felt it was not an area she was capable of handling. And so the two of them had this very codependent, enabling, kind of relationship. Well, I didn't know that growing up, that that's what I was learning, but that's what I learned unconsciously. It's what I picked up.
Right.
And so it was so funny because my husband said shortly after we were married, he said, Wendy, the moment we said I do, you changed.
Wow.
And I had no idea what that meant. And he didn't really know how to articulate it either. He just sensed it. And it wasn't until 9 years into our relationship when my eyes opened up in a new way, and I recognized, oh my goodness, I am what I called a Barbara wife, which my mother's name is Barbara.
Oh.
I was being her. I was modeling her. I was doing wife the same way my mother did wife.
Ah.
And there were so many things that my husband, when I first met him, he was so capable of handling on his own. But I eventually took over those things. So like, I'll do it better, or I'm the wife, let me handle it, or I have the time, or I enjoy doing it, or I'm a perfectionist with this and you're not. And so little by little, he allowed me to do a bunch of stuff for him that he had been totally capable of doing on his own, but now I was doing it, and 9 years later, I resented the hell out of it. And it was like this bizarre double-edged sword, because for 9 years I did it because that's what made me feel like a valuable wife.
Mm-hmm.
But then it started becoming a burden, and I didn't want to do it.
Right.
And I started to recognize how and why and in what areas I was doing this. But now to say, honey, would you please take back all these things you used to do? Even though you haven't done them for about 9 years now, it's like, it's your turn to handle it because I've been carrying these for 9 years. Well, over 9 years, we morphed and changed. And I said to him, I go, I got this awareness that I'm this mega enabler, and this is not going to go on. I'm not going to be a Barbara wife anymore. I'm going to learn how to be an independent woman. And not independent like as in not being married, but I said, I don't know if our marriage is going to be able to withstand the changes that I make. Now, at the time, he didn't really know what that meant, and he said, I'm sure we'll be fine. But I really started changing me, and I was no longer willing to do for him or anyone else what they really had for themselves to do. And I started to see how I was robbing him and other people of learning and growing opportunities. And so I started to really become very non-enabling. And what that meant is we were no longer matching one another, because he had adapted to me doing these things. And even though I was saying, I really want you to do this stuff now, I don't know what happened, but he didn't. Or he didn't really recognize I was really serious. I wanted him to start doing these things. But what I recognized is our matching qualities were no longer matching. So we ended the relationship where we were not a match for each other anymore. And so that was a long story to get back to the person who's trying to manipulatively get back an ex or get somebody in their life that maybe doesn't want them. Well, if there are matching qualities to be had, and we don't always know what they are,
Right.
you know, because I didn't know this stuff when I first got married. We just loved each other and boom, got married. But I can see now looking back how many things we really did match on, because somebody who's an enabler like me needs somebody who likes to be enabled.
Yes,
in that
both ways.
respect, we were a perfect match.
Yeah, right.
You know, until we weren't.
Yep.
So I don't think in a way there is any such thing as true manipulation, because law of attraction is always doing the matching.
I think more than anything, it's self-deception. I think that somebody who's trying to do that is really deceiving themselves that they can do something that they, first of all, really can't do, and second of all, even if they manage in some way to pull off the thing that they're trying to make happen, they'll end up a few years later in the situation you found yourself in, that, oh, all of a sudden this thing I set up isn't really what I had in mind in the first place. And that's self-defeating.
I was telling you about this group of people that I was introduced to some new ways of thinking. One of the words they used quite often was the word manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a negative connotation on the word manipulation. But I'd listen to them use it, and I'm like, I don't think they're trying to use it in a negative way, but why do they use that word so much? And so I was asking a lot of questions, and I came to understand that there's manipulation that they talk about from a more positive perspective. And I'm like, oh, okay, I use the word influence. Like, I know it can be highly influential in helping somebody understand a new idea, or if I'm selling them something, I can influence them to want to buy it knowing that it would be something beneficial to them. So I use the word influence, but my friends were using the word manipulation. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting, and it made me think about what the root of the word manipulation is, because manipulate means basically to use your hand. That's the man part. The man part is hand. So to use your hand to do things, that's manipulating. And when you look at it that way, then clearly over time we have attributed a number of meanings to it beyond that, including manipulating other humans, and perhaps even a negative emotional quality of, oh, he's so manipulative or she's so manipulative. But originally it was just, your hands doing things. Or another alternative meaning would be a handful. To manipulate is to have a handful, believe it or not, which is kind of appropriate when you think about it, because when you're trying to manipulate somebody else, you really have a handful. You got yourself a tough case there, because no matter how you work that one, it's probably not going to play out real well.
Well, and how you use it, again, goes back to what meaning do you give to it, because what meaning is going to determine how you feel.
Oh, yeah.
About using it, and that's going to be your vibrational broadcast that the law of attraction will respond to.
And that's the bottom line right there, meaning.
For me, in my vocabulary, if I talk about manipulation, it usually will have a negative connotation, because I think of manipulation as a negative thing. And yet I have a number of friends that will use that word, but they don't mean anything negative by it at all.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, they talk about it like you're empowered because you have an ability to manipulate, circumstances to work out to your benefit.
Like you say, it just depends on how you're defining the word. I could literally, if I wanted to, I don't really think about it this way, but I could literally define the law of attraction in terms of me manipulating the energy of the universe to get what I want. Now, that's not actually the way I want to think about it, but I could see myself, if I really needed to, I could define it that way. And I think there would be some accuracy to it also. It just doesn't, emotionally it doesn't work real well for me, because I've heard too much use of the word manipulation in a negative context, so I don't really want to use that word. But at least not in that way, not to define how the law of attraction works. Again, like we've been saying all along, it comes down to what emotional connotation do you ascribe to the word you're using. And that's really the most important thing at all. If you think that the word has a positive connotation and it really does feel positive to you, then guess what? It's a positive word. And if that exact same word has a negative connotation to somebody else, guess what? That is a negative word. I mean, it's true in both cases.
And, the last couple of days we've been talking about stories, and we've been talking about, mostly because we've been talking about the book that we're producing.
That's right.
To let our LOA listeners be inspired by.
Mm-hmm.
But I've now submitted 2 different chapters.
Yep.
And in the writing of them, I've been very inspired by reading them over and over and over, as I've been proofing them and editing, etc. And I started to recognize a new concept that was resident within storytelling. And I realized, one of the things that I recognized just to let you know, when I was doing my second chapter, when I was doing it over the weekend, and I didn't want to be up in my office with my full-size keyboard where I do really good, easy work because I work at my office all week long.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, I wanted to be in my living room watching TV, in the background, and I was using my laptop. Well, I'm not as adept at using my laptop. The keys feel different, etc. And so what I would do is I would print out a copy, once I had proofed it, I'd print it, and then I would handwrite my notes, and then I'd go back and I'd change it. And I kept feeling like, oh my God, I keep doing this over and over and over, until finally I gave up. And then I waited till during the week when I was sitting behind my computer. And here's what I found out about me, is every time I would go to change the structure of a sentence, I was right-clicking on the synonyms and thesaurus, which that's not as easily accessible from my keyboard on my laptop, but it is when I have a full-size mouse and a full-size keyboard. And I was finding all sorts of really cool, juicy words. And I was like, ooh, I haven't used this word yet in this chapter. This is a fun word. Or this is a really descriptive word. Or this is more exciting than the word I had before. And my use of adjectives was kind of growing as I was using the thesaurus.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, we're talking about words, and I realized that I punched up my story from being kind of vanilla to it having much more flavor. It had 31 flavors eventually.
Yeah, right.
Because I was using all sorts of different juicy words. Now, what that caused me to realize is that if on my own, now I'm away from the book, but if on my own, if there's something I want to create or something I want to imagine being a part of my future, if I tell myself a fictional story and I use really punctuated words, it's more exciting to me, and I feel it deeply, but I realize that's what I am then broadcasting into the universe vibrationally.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
And so even if I'm telling, quote, a fictional story, I have a feeling it won't be fictional very long.
Oh, I agree. And really, when you think about it, that's what Abraham's been trying to teach us. They've been trying to teach us how to take what we normally take as being what is real, and turn it into what we want it to be by imagining something different. That's storytelling. I mean, we can call it what we want, but at its root level, that is storytelling. The art of telling a fictional story is telling a story that is not what is.
And it has a lot of juicy details.
Oh, yeah. Well, I wanted to get to that in a minute. The only exception I can think of is if you're telling the story of, here's what the actual sequence of events was. And even then, even in that case, you're still doing it from your perspective, which means some of the details you put in could be very different from what another observer would think of to put into their version of the story. So even in that scenario, even in the scenario where you're saying what is, your what is can actually be different from somebody else's what is on the same event.
Very true.
So,
I want to say it was on the last day of the Cancun land cruise that I attended for Abraham a couple of years ago. Normally, people get in the hot seat, you raise your hand, Abraham calls them, and they get to ask whatever question they want.
Right.
Well, it might have been the second to last day. Abraham really threw a curveball at the audience. because they didn't tell the first person. The first person gets called. They're up there. They're so excited. And they go to, like, tell their story about the woes of their life so they can then get to their question. And Abraham said, we're going to do something different. We want to help you, like, punch up your stories so that you can get into the receiving mode to receive the things that you've been desiring.
Okay.
You know, and everyone's like, okay, sure, we're on board. But, oh, my gosh, it was such a phenomenal experience to watch and be a part of people having to switch gears midstream.
Yeah.
Because, in a way, they were used to coming up and telling their negative stories.
Yes.
And then Abraham, of course, would correct them and give them, here's a better way to do it, blah, blah, blah. And instead, Abraham was trying to teach us how to do this for ourselves. And every time somebody would come up and start to talk about, you know, the story of what they don't want, Abraham would go, no, tell us the story of what you do want. Oh, my goodness, it was like pulling teeth, trying to get people to even figure out how to put a sentence structure together. And so Abraham lovingly and gently would say, what do you want? What is it that you are desiring? So it would take them a while, and finally they would say, well, I'm wanting a new relationship in my life. And Abraham's, okay, good. So now we know what you want. Now tell us what you really want in that relationship. And you'd hear somebody say something like, well, I want us to be a match, and I want us to, like, be happy together. And Abraham's like, blah, 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 blah. So tell us the juicy details. Tell us what it'll feel like when you have it. Well, I'll be happy. Blah, 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 blah. How happy? Tell us some details of what happiness feels like. Well, we'll smile, we'll hold hands. And again, Abraham's like, blah, 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 blah. And what they were trying to do is make a point that what the person in the hot seat was saying had like zero vibrational quality of anything that the law of attraction could utilize to bring to them a wonderful, exciting, exotic, fabulous, satisfying relationship.
Exactly. Yes.
You know, and so every now and then Abraham would go, okay, we're going to do it ourselves so that we can show you how this is supposed to go down. And they were using tons of adjectives, and they could get into the nitty-gritty of just every little nuance of how good it felt when, you know, their lips touched and the sensations just went throughout their whole body and they felt tingles. And, I mean, Abraham was doing this awesome sales job, and what a great relationship would be like.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that person would sit down, and then Abraham would call up the next person, and it was person after person after person, where it was the same kind of struggle trying to get them to get into the feeling place, the juicy nitty-gritty of how every little piece would feel great. And that's when it dawned on me, we as a culture have really not been schooled in how to tell stories in a way that are really tactile.
Absolutely.
And sensual.
Agreed.
And I don't mean sexual, but I mean sensual to the senses. Like if you want to talk about, you know, like taking a bite into a juicy orange and feeling the orange juice dripping down your chin as you taste the sweetness in your mouth and you roll it around with your tongue and you just savor that luscious, tart, sweet flavor, that's not something we've been schooled in. And we tend to speak most of the time in a much more dry fashion. And in a way, that's where we're not using the words that are available to us to its best and its finest use. Because when we really think into all those fabulous words that we know and start talking from a place of feeling and emotion, then we're broadcasting something in such a phenomenal way there's no doubt that the law of attraction is going to match you up with all of those sensual, juicy, wonderful details that you have been experiencing as you share your story.
I was thinking about this subject recently when I was doing some work on my positive music list, because whenever possible I try to add something, a new song or something to the list that I know is a good ad. And one I added recently was by Joni Mitchell. She had a song many years ago called Chelsea Morning that has just a really nice positive and happy vibe to it. And there's an example. Joni Mitchell was a wonderful poet. She was also a good songwriter, but she knew how to evoke texture and feeling from her lyrics. And let me just read a little piece of that song. It'll give you a taste of it. Woke up, it was a Chelsea morning, and the first thing that I knew, there was milk and toast and honey and a bowl of oranges too. And the sun poured in like butterscotch and stuck to all my senses. I mean, that's just dripping with all kinds of evocative ideas, right? And she did it in 3 lines. I mean, that shows how good she was at it. And still is today. She's just a terrific poet and songwriter. No, I'm not saying that the average person has to be that good.
And then, of course, if you sing the lyrics...
Oh, yeah, right.
that adds even another level of emotion that you... I mean, I don't know anybody who can sing lyrics without feeling something.
Yeah.
When they're singing to music.
Yeah, and I mean, she was brilliant at it. So I guess my point is, look for people who are good storytellers, who are good poets, who do know how to tie in the adjectives. And by the way, more than adjectives, I wanted to add in something else too. If you're trying to tell a story, you know what the best way to tell a story is? Is to describe events that happen. This happened, and then that happened, and that happened, and this person did this, and that person did that. And you start telling a story, even though you're making it all up, you start telling a series of events that happened. And as you get used to doing that, then you say, well, I want to make this a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to invent a whole scene where something unusual happens. You know, I met the love of my life in a park. And when we meet, we take a walk together. And as we're walking in the moonlight, I take her hand into mine, and wondrously, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, butterflies fly through the space that we're in at night. They're right through a street light where we can see them. We said, wow, butterflies passing through at this very moment. I mean, no, I'm just making this up. It's kind of nonsensical. But the point is, tell a story of what happened. Don't just tell it in terms of the adjectives of how nice it felt and how delicious it felt. There were a series of steps that took place. Because when you start telling a series of steps, your story starts to move. It starts to take on a life of its own. I discovered that when I was in the process many years ago of writing my own first novel. And the first draft of my novel, quite honestly, Wendy, it sucked. And the reason it sucked, let me tell you, it really sucked. It was terrible. And the reason it sucked is it didn't go anywhere. It moved so slowly. I mean, talk about Joni Mitchell's butterscotch, the sun pouring like butterscotch. The butterscotch flowed faster than my story did. That's how slow the story was moving. So, I mean... Once I understood that, and my sister was the one who taught me how to do it, once I understood that I had to tell a series of action events using active verbs, and for people who don't know what an active verb is versus a passive verb would be I am, I was, I had, I did, verbs that don't actually go anywhere. Whereas an active verb would be I walked, I ran, I climbed, things that actually show that you're doing something, right? When you tell stories using active verbs, all of a sudden the stories take on a life of their own, and you say, "Whoa, I wrote that! Holy cow!" And now all of a sudden you find, "Hey, I can write stories."
Well, and another strategy that I have found is so let me just kind of couch it in this. What I'm wanting to present right now is the idea that if you are wanting to really activate law of attraction to bring to you really wonderful things that you desire in your life, then it's to be deliberate about it. It's highly advantageous to tell the story of what you desire in a way that really feels good to you. Because if it feels really good to you, then you're broadcasting something that's really a solid vibration of what you want to return back to you.
Yes.
But sometimes, not everybody is a great storyteller, or at least they don't think they are. And one of the ways you can actually begin to get more movement is literally to move your body.
True. Very good. Yes.
Because if you're just sitting still, sometimes it's much more difficult to do something where you get excited about it. So, if you have a habit of walking or running or being on the treadmill or doing anything where your body is in motion, that's a great time to practice throwing out words and kind of emoting, to feel with intensity the story that you're wanting to tell. But motion in your body sometimes is a really great strategy to kind of get the juices flowing.
Right, absolutely. Because when you're moving your body, now you're thinking in terms of the motion of the story. The story starts to move. It starts to go somewhere. It doesn't stay stuck in one place. An interesting word there, by the way, stuck in one place. How often do we talk about feeling stuck? Well, one of the reasons we feel stuck is our stories are stuck in one place. Like the people who are in the hot seat, right? So what's this relationship like? Oh, well, it's happy. That's stuck in one place. That's not going anywhere.
Well, I'll tell you, sometimes when I've worked with clients and they're in a place that they feel really stuck, I purposely will pace. Like I work with them on the phone and I have a headset on, so I'm not tethered to my desk or to an office, and I start pacing through my house as I'm talking to them. And what I've noticed is sometimes me being in motion actually translates to them starting to shift from a place of non-motion to motion in their own thought process.
Very cool. I like that.
Yeah. And then I also notice that deeper, richer words sometimes come to me when I'm in motion versus when I'm sitting down.
That's true. When I was writing my novel, I was always looking for new ways of expressing stuff, because especially when you have a novel that has a lot of dialogue, and mine had a lot of dialogue, you can only say he said, she did, said, he said, she said so many times, and you start to get really bored really quickly. So you're trying to find different ways to express the fact that dialogue took place, right? And you're constantly looking for new words and new ways of telling the story, so that they're doing it while they're walking or while they're driving the car or something like that, so that it's always a different feel to it. Well, I would come up with those scenarios by doing exactly what you just talked about. I'd get up and walk. I'd literally go out and take my walks, or I'd walk around the house, or I'd pace the house. In fact, my wife at one point said, when we get our new house, we're going to have this nice long hallway so you can pace it back and forth, back and forth.
We're going to have the internal Walt track.
That's right, exactly. And she's probably right. That would probably be a good thing to have like a nice long house with this nice long hallway that I could just walk up and down when I'm doing my pacing, when I'm trying to get something going, or I'm working through a problem or whatever, because it's great for storytelling when you have that kind of activity going. No doubt about it.
Wow.
So we have let's see, we've got 2 minutes left. I want to make sure that we give people, once again, what we usually give them, which is a reminder about how you subscribe if they have not yet subscribed, so that people can subscribe and share. Easiest way, go to loatoday.net. You'll find the subscribe buttons right there. Particularly easy if you have an iPhone. You just click the button and it'll walk you right through how to subscribe it automatically. If you are on any of the Android phones, Samsung, Motorola, LG, Nokia, whatever, any of those phones, you probably need to install your own podcast software. But it's really easy to do. You just go to the Play Store, do a search for Podcast Manager or any of the other podcast apps that are there. Podcast Manager is a free one. Download and install the app, and then open that app and do the search on LOA Today, and we'll pop up there. And you can also, by the way, on the iPhone, do the same thing through the iTunes Store. You can search for LOA Today there. So please do subscribe, and we know that the people who have subscribed are listening like crazy because the numbers keep going up, and that's a good thing.
Yay!
And for somebody who wants to have that personal touch, because you keep talking about what you do when you're in a session, there are probably some people saying, that might actually work for me. So how do they reach you if they want to do a session?
Well, only if you feel like you're a match to me. Only if you feel like something I've said you really resonate to. Because I only want to work with people I match with, just like you would only want to work with a coach that matches you.
Absolutely.
So if that's the case, you can go to wendydillard.com, and all of my contact information is available, so I'm really easy to connect with.
Sounds great. You make it so easy. Wendy, let's do it again tomorrow, because it continues to be a pleasure every single day.
You got it. I'll be here.
I will be here as well. We hope you are also here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.